Well, hello, writers. Welcome to episode number 120 of How Do You Write? I'm Rachael Herron. Thrilled, as usual, that you're here. Today, I am talking with the very, very fun and awesome Carter Wilson, thriller writer. And we are talking about pace, which is something that I am super interested in because my pace is always a little bit languorous. And when you're writing thriller, you can't be languorous. You gotta be hop stepping. And so it was really fun to talk to him about that and many other things. I know that you'll enjoy the interview. In today's catch-up portion, I have good news. It's small news, but it's good news that I went out of town for the weekend with my friend Sophie Littlefield. We went down south to see my dad and my stepmom, who's just great, and to see her stepdaughter. So we were out of town for 2 nights. We were in San Luis Obispo, which is kind of where I grew up, where I went to undergrad. It's my town. We stayed at the old hotel called the Peachtree Inn, where I used to work as an undergrad. I had always, up to 4 jobs at a time as I paid my way through college. And I mean, at a time, I would have, 16 units and working 4 jobs in 6 hours here and 4 hours there. But the Peachtree Inn, I would go in on Friday nights and stay till Monday. I was the night desk clerk. I was the day desk clerk. I made the bread that we served in the rooms. And because I was there for so long, my friends would come and visit. I did all my studying at the big tables in the breakfast room. And back then is when Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way had come out in the 90s, right? And I started it there at those glass-topped tables. And my friend Angela would come to the hotel at night, and we would sit and talk about our dreams and do our writing and dream about the time that we would be grown up and creative and living a creative life. She was a dancer and a writer. I was just a writer, just wanted to be a writer. Neither of us were writers yet, because we never wrote. If you write, you're a writer. But so we started doing morning pages there, and it had such an effect on me. I think one of the most romantic things of looking back on my youth is imagining myself on the back porch of the Peachtree Inn that has these rocking Adirondack chairs and this big green hill behind the hotel. And I would smoke my cigarettes and I would dream of the day that I would be a writer. And one time a writer came to stay at the hotel. He was a real writer. I know this because he was working on a screenplay, and Francis Ford Coppola called for him, and I transferred Francis Ford Coppola down to this writer's room. And I was really embarrassed because he said, "Hey, it's Frank Coppola. Can I talk to," what's his name? I don't remember the writer's name. And I laughed. I said, "Oh my gosh, your name is like the director, Francis Ford Coppola." And he says, "I am the director. Could you transfer me?" But I just remember thinking, like, I know a writer. And this writer had come to the hotel for 3 days just to hole himself up and write for 12 hours a day and get it done, because apparently he was on strict deadline and his boss was calling him. But I remember talking to that writer, and he said, "Writing's a really bad idea. Don't do it unless there's nothing else that you can do." And I always find that particular phrase a little bit galling, because I can do anything. I, if needed, can dig ditches, although I wouldn't be very good at it. I can work any job. I can work hard. I can work dirty. I can work 18 hours and have 6 hours off. I know this because I've done it before. I can do anything else, but the only thing I ever wanted to do was write. And so when Sophie and I went back to see my dad and her stepdaughter, I booked us rooms at the Peachtree Inn, which is still run, is still in the same family. My old boss unfortunately has dementia, but it's still his favorite place to be, even though he doesn't really know where he is. And Sophie and I got one of the rooms. I had never stayed in that room. Sometimes when my boyfriend would come into town, I would get a room at my hotel, which is actually, now looking back on it, pretty embarrassing. But I'd never stayed in this particular double room. It was raining and pouring. This huge storm had rolled in, and we walked next door and had a big extravagant breakfast at the apple farm. But the best part was that on the whole trip there and back, we were talking about our books, and a lot of times me and Sophie and another friend of ours, we plot our books together, and we had plotted basically both of our books in the 4-hour drive south. And we both sat at the same glass top tables and we pounded out our synopses of these new books. Sophie sent hers to her agent immediately. Her agent loved it. She's writing something terribly scary. And my agent, who I love and worship and adore, and she doesn't always want me to write the books I want to write because she's smart and good and she really does know financially what's going to be best for me. She's great. But I really want to write this book that I came up with. And she sent me an email. This is my whole point. She sent me an email that said, I am somewhere between like and love on this idea, which is basically like getting an A+ from my agent. And it means that I can dive into this book and start to write some preliminary chapters so that we'll have them in hand when we're able to take them to my editor in order to pitch them the next book when the time is right. So that was very exciting. It was very exciting to come up with this book that I really want to write, but it was also just so exciting to be at that table in the same room with worse art. I have to say worse art. But in the same room where I spent so many of my early 20s evenings, and spent so much time in that particular room dreaming of being a writer. And I was just there as a working writer. It was fantastic. I put a little blurb on it on Instagram and got a lot of response from it, actually. I think people really relate to walking in and opening the door of your dreams that you have had for a long time. And I think as writers, that's what we're all trying to do. I'm trying to do that on a daily basis. If you're listening to the podcast, you have the dream of being a writer. You already are a writer. My friend, if you're writing, you're a writer. I will go so far as to say, and not everyone will agree with me on this, but even if your heart just knows that you're a writer, you're a writer. I also say get some writing done. And I will always add to that, you know this, get some terrible writing done. The only thing we could do is write terrible first drafts. And I cannot overstate that. Terrible is terrible. Terrible is not good. Terrible is not adequate. Terrible is not... everybody else says terrible, but it's actually good for me. No, it's just terrible. We lower our expectations of our own selves in order to get the first drafts out, and then we make them into something good in revision. And Carter and I talk about that in this podcast, so you're going to enjoy that. Quick shout out to new patrons. One of my favorite people, Toby Neal, is a patron. Thanks, Toby. Faith Park Dodge, Eliza Peak. Thank you, you darling. Eliza Peak and Adrienne Bell have a podcast called The Misfits Guide to Writing Indie Romance, which if you're a romance writer, you should be listening to. They're amazing. And I was just on their show. I think I'm going to be on an upcoming episode about talking about hybrid writers versus indie writers. So you should go listen to that. Carla Sondheim. Thank you, Carla. What a kind note you sent me. And Katie Rodanti. Thank you to new patrons. Really means the world to me that you support me, that you say that you like this, and that you give me the time to write the essays that my heart wants to write. I believe I told you about last month's essay, which I'm very proud of, and I'm still hearing really, really good things about. So thank you, patrons. You can always go look at my Patreon at patreon.com/Rachael, Rachael. I have no other news. I'm going to jump right into the interview now with Carter. I hope that you enjoyed. I know that you will. Please get your writing done and tell me about it. Somebody wrote to me this week and told me all about their writing, and it was a beautiful email. I want to get those emails, so send them to me. Tell me how you're doing, and thanks for listening. We'll talk soon. Okay, well, I could not be more pleased today to have Carter Wilson on the show. Hi, Carter. How are you?
Hi, fine, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm thrilled to have you. Let me give you a little introduction. USA Today and #1 Denver Post bestselling author Carter Wilson has written 5 critically acclaimed standalone psychological thrillers, as well as numerous short stories. He's a 2-time winner of both the Colorado Book Award and the International Book Award, and his novels have received multiple starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and Library Journal. His 6th novel, The Dead Girl in 2A, and the cover, I love it, will be released in July 2019 from Poison Pen Press. Carter lives in Erie, Colorado, in a Victorian house that is spooky but isn't haunted yet. And that's a great way to end that line. So my first psychological thriller is coming out from Penguin in August.
Oh, right on.
So I'm kind of
Congratulations.
going into that market from where I've been, and it's all I've
Yeah.
been reading for years. So
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
the color black is on my Kindle, and I'm about to crack into that.
Oh,
But
enjoy.
so you are prolific, you get work done. I would love to talk to you about how your process works. How do you do all this? When and where and how do you write? Are you in your office right now where we see you?
Yes, I am in my office right now. Although most of my writing I do out and about. I
Yeah.
like to be kind of surrounded by people, even though I slip on the Bose noise canceling headphones and I go in my own world. I kind of like the energy around me. But yeah, I have a full-time job. So aside from writing, as most authors do. And so it's a chip away at it kind of a process. And I treat it as I would treat any kind of commitment. I do it 7 days a week. And,
Hmm.
some days it's a crappy job like data entry and you're not enjoying it, but you got to do it. And other days it's amazing. So my goal really is about 500 words a day.
And do you do
Um,
that before your day job or after?
Usually, it depends. Usually before. So I mean, if I can get a solid 30 to 45 minutes in, and I
Hmm.
can just get immediately in the zone, then I'm done. And with that, it takes about a year to get a book fully done, kind of
Hmm.
rewritten, submitted to my agent for her comments, and then ready to give to the publisher. So year and a quarter. So I'm not as fast as I'd like to be, but
But
it's the best I can do.
what I love about what you're saying is it's so solidly doable. There are people
Totally.
who, I can't get 2,000 words a day, or they say I can't get 3,000 words a day, but you can get 500 words a day and
Yeah.
still have a life
Yeah.
and
Totally.
and a very full life and complete books.
You're completely right, and I think that's where a lot of people get stuck is it's so mental. So the other thing that I do is I just try to plow through. I'll right now I'm working on something. I'm like I'm going to get 40,000 words done before I even go back and look at what I've written, and it's going to be a lot of editing, but at least I'll have 40,000 words done. And a lot of people get 5,000 words done, and then it's just life gets in the way. But you got
Yeah.
to make it your life. It has to be as important to you as your workout regimen or your day job or your family. So
Hmm.
otherwise it doesn't get done. There's no question.
What are you, a plotter or a pantser?
So I'm historically an unabashed pantser, and I never know what I'm doing. I never know how it's going to go. I just have the opening scene. That's all I know. I just think of some scene that I'm like, this would be a really crazy scene, and I have no idea who these people are or what this means, but I would read this book.
That sounds like a fun way to go.
It is, but it also totally sucks because then you're like, I don't know what happens next, and
I wish someone would tell me.
yeah, so I both ways a little bit. I'm learning like right what I'm working on. Like my book that's coming out was such a pantser book that it hurt. I really struggled with it. And so what I'm working on now, I'm at least mapping out the characters. I don't know what they do, but I know everything about them, but I don't know what their role is in the story. But at least I can go back to the character guide and be like, okay, this is what this person would probably do. So I'm learning a little bit of both.
I heard a great suggestion. I heard Meg Wolitzer talk last week, and she says she always writes the first 80 pages of her books the way you do your first scene, and
Yeah.
then she comes up with an outline after that.
Yeah, and I've done a little bit of that too, but I inevitably deviate from it
Yeah.
because the joy of writing to me is kind of not knowing, and it's a little precious to say, well, the characters speak to me and tell me what's going to happen. That's not true at all. I mean, but there are times when all of a sudden I just think of something that I'm like, I wouldn't have thought of this 3 weeks ago. And
Hmm.
that becomes this moment of like, okay, for some reason I had to wait to unveil this to myself.
Hmm.
And so that's the best part of that's when writing is totally fun. And that doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, it just makes everything worth it.
So, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to writing?
Yeah, I mean, probably that.
Hmm.
All the missed opportunities that you're not thinking about, not knowing how it's going to end, um, trying to stay a little bit, I guess, within your market. That can be a little bit of a struggle because sometimes I want to do something that's a little bit more out there. And, after a few books, you've kind of established yourself a little bit as a certain type of
Yes.
writer. And so
Yes.
and I respect that, but sometimes I struggle with that a little bit as well. And my editor has to rein me in. And so I think those are some of the challenges. And then, the whole publishing industry itself is a challenge. That's a whole, writing is one thing. The industry is is this very opaque, confusing thing that is hard to get a lot of feedback on. And how do I get more recognition? How do I get noticed more? So that's a game too, of which, you only have a finite amount of control.
And I only have a finite amount of patience for it too, and I think that a lot of writers feel the same way. If we could
Yeah.
figure out a way to handle all that better, we would.
Yeah, totally. And if I were sitting here waiting for my royalty statements as my means of income, I'd be suicidal. But so I'm fortunate that I don't have to do that. So I do kind of have this Zen approach to it. It's like, let things happen. I try to direct things, but I don't try to get anxious or frantic about it. I try to learn and see what works and what doesn't work. But marketing and PR, it's really tricky with this industry. So all authors will tell you that they don't really know what works.
Nobody does.
Nobody does.
Neither do the publishers when it comes to that,
Right.
or they would
Totally.
make us all bestsellers.
Totally.
So
Totally.
what's your biggest joy in writing then? Is it the moment that things jump out at you and surprise you? Or?
Yeah, it's kind of that what if moment. I love that what if moment of like you're writing a scene and then you just what if this happens?
Yes.
I had in one of my books, one of my early books, I had a guy driving on the Beltway in DC, and I was trying to establish his character, and he was kind of a jerk. And then as I wanted him to be a little bit more likable, so in traffic, he actually gets out to help a stranded motorist. And then I realized, like, well, what if he just gets hit by a car right now? And I don't even know what that meant, but I'm like, he's going to get hit by a car. And it totally changed my story. And it unveiled all these things about what happens after he gets hit by this car. And I love that. That is the most exciting thing to me. It's just like, I have the power to just make this happen. And it might be a good idea. It might not be a good idea. But
But boy,
if
is
were
it fun right
outlined,
now. Yeah.
I would feel like, okay, I'm sticking to this script. But I love that just freewheeling aspect of it.
That makes me. I'm on the edge of starting a new book. It makes me want to be deep in a book.
Yeah.
I just love that feeling.
Yeah.
Can you share a craft tip with us?
I'm big into editing, so I mean, I
Yay.
even have a tattoo that says "Kill Your Darlings" on my arm.
That's
I'm
amazing.
I'm very big into. I love deleting stuff.
Me too.
And it's just sometimes it's painful, but I love pace. I really focus on pace. It's very important to my work, and it's kind of established me as who I am. It's how I write. So I will delete a lot of sentences. I'll just delete a lot of words out. Every sentence I want to look at and say, what's an easier way to say that? What's a more powerful way to say that? Can I make up a verb that can convey this in 2-word sentence instead of a 6-word sentence? And so it's editing is hard. But it's really where the where the flesh comes out of my book, and just all of a sudden I'm like, okay, now this is an impactful read. Before it was just kind of meandering. So I would say just focus on pace. If you're writing thrillers, pace. I mean, story is critical, but don't forget about pace, because that's what keeps people turning the pages.
I have such a hard time with pace. I've been a women's fiction writer in the past, as well as romance and memoir and a bunch of other things. But for women's fiction, I really love getting into the slow movement of a scene, and that's what my agent and my editor just kept chopping down in the thriller. You don't have time to explore the emotional ramifications of every sentence. And could you give me a little bit of advice on how to get rid of how do I know what is slowing it down? Do you ever have that problem?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's very hard. And I probably the biggest criticism I tend to get is sometimes I'm too brief, and I love 2-word sentences, and I love things that just evoke emotion and sound and smell without really getting into it. So I'll even have a 2-word paragraph. I'm big into that. So you're just reading and it's just kind of coming at you. And sometimes it's too much. Sometimes you need to slow down and give your reader a chance to take a breath and kind of recover from that scene. But when you ramp up to that scene, if it's a really critical scene where there's because I write a lot of paranoia and a lot of tension and a lot of like what's in your mind, and so if it's a scene that's big into that, it's very brief, and it's like a knife stabbing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want the reader to feel. It's like the stabbing at them with these words. And then I'll read it out loud to myself, and I'll kind of feel it. I'll kind of feel if it's like too much or not enough. But you have to then recognize the chapters where you have to give the reader a break, because sometimes I have trouble doing that.
And allow them to take a breath and wipe the sweat away from their brow.
That's right.
So when you're sitting around with writer pals, what is the thing that you always go back to? What's the thing you're kind of obsessed with in the writing world?
You mean in terms of what we like or what we don't like, or
yeah, anything that you can just talk about in a bar over cocktails with writer friends? What are you passionate about?
Whenever I'm talking with writer friends, it's almost inevitably a discussion about the industry rather than a discussion about writing, and who got what deal and how much did they make and what publishers are doing this and that and the other thing. So it is this like brother and sisterhood of like everybody's like trying to like get that bigger piece and trying to understand like who's making
gossipy
it.
Too.
It is so gossipy, and honestly, it's hard not to get jealous, to feel like like, oh man, I love you, that's awesome, but why didn't that happen for me, or vice versa. So it's always industry stuff. It's rarely, because a lot of my friends, like especially when I go to like Thriller Fest and hang out with people, everyone's writing thrillers, but maybe political thrillers, sci-fi thrillers, and I write more domestic suspense, and so you might not even have that much in common in terms of what you write, but everyone's connected by the industry for sure.
Well, if it helps, when I was sitting around with my pals discussing the industry, and we were straight up gossiping, we had some dirt and we were going with it, and your name came up, and it was all flattery. And to the point where they were discussing your newsletter. And I went and immediately signed up for it, because they were saying nobody does a newsletter as well as Carter Wilson. You need to get on it and be on it just to see what he's doing and how funny he is and all of this stuff. So when you were being gossiped about the other day, it was good. Your ears should have been burning in a pleasant way.
Well, and thank you for plugging that. I'll say, like, one of the things I've tried to learn is what works and what doesn't work. And everyone comes back and says newsletters. So about a year and a half ago, I just started like, I'm going to commit to this once a month. I'm going to make it meaty. I'm going to make it funny. I'm going to reveal very personal things about myself. I want it to be something that I would read about somebody else. I don't want it to just be about promo, because when you only have a book coming out once a year, every 18 months, there's only so much promo you can really do. So I tell stories about my kids, my cats, stupid things that I've done, where I've been, where I'm going to be, anything that I find funny, which is very different than my book. So it's just a different take on me. So I've worked hard to make that into something special.
Well, it is coming back to reward you. And where can people sign up for that if they want to keep an eye on that?
You can definitely find me. We're just overhauling my website, thanks to Maddie's help, at carterwilson.com, and everything you need to know about me is on there.
Oh yeah, and she had that cool slider thing that she gave you. I don't have a slider.
Yeah, Maddie does fantastic work. Yeah, sliders are cool. Yeah, it's WordPress.
If anybody's curious, that is Maddie James. She's at Zuni.com. It's XUNI.com, and she's fabulous. So what is the best book that you've read recently, and why did you love it?
Well, I just finished Stephen King's new novella, Elevation.
Did you like it?
Yeah, it's tiny. It's it's 144 pages in a 5x7 book, so it's truly a novella, and I loved it. It was beautiful. It's very, it's typical King, where you take a very bizarre premise and a fantastic premise, and you plop it down in the real world and see, okay, how do you deal with this? And I'll read mostly anything by Stephen King, but I just having something that was so short by him, that wasn't quite a short story, it was just nice to see, and it was a very emotional story, actually. And he's good at that. He doesn't do a lot of that, and I found myself well connected to it, so I really enjoyed it. I recommend it.
I've only really discovered Stephen King in the last few years, and people have heard me talk about it on the show before, but I keep going around telling people, did you know he's great?
Yeah, you got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, we did know. Everybody knew. You're the last one to not know. So, well, what would you like to tell us about right now? Tell us about your latest project, or what's coming up, your book in July, and we already know we can find you at carterwilson.com.
Yeah, I'm excited about the book coming out. So I'm with Source Books, and they're a fantastic publisher. And they've done a lot of support for me, and I've got a new thriller coming out in July. It's called The Dead Girl in 2A, and so this was a total pantser. This is my pantser move for this book. I just had this idea of like, what if a man and a woman met by sitting next to each other in first class on the plane, And what if they're just viscerally convinced that they know each other? Like they just are so connected and they don't know how they're connected. And they spend the entire flight trying to figure it out. And they find a couple things in common that are kind of creepy about their past, but they don't really understand why they're connected. And at the end of the flight, the woman says to the man that she's going to her destination to kill herself. And so the entire book is about what happens after they get off that plane.
Dude, that's awesome. That sounds amazing, and I'm desperate to read it now. I cannot wait to get that book.
Oh, good.
That
good.
sounds
I appreciate that.
Exactly like the kind of book I want to read. So. Yay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a delight
pleasure,
to
Rachel.
talk to you. And
yep, absolutely.
I wish you very happy writing, and I can't wait to read your darn book.
Thank you. Congratulations on your new release.
Thank you. All right.
Take
Talk
care.
to you soon. Bye.
Bye.